Hey yo, what is up, Knights? Aegis Rick here, and with level 100 cap looming right around the corner, I think it's probably best for my channel to be moving more in the guide direction to help get people on the right track. In this video, I want to talk about the game in a more top level view, so we'll be covering the class and party roles, how the gearing system is laid out, and how the endgame gameplay generally works. In the description below, I have left a link to a useful spreadsheet that basically summarizes what each class's roles are, and if you're unsure what your class is when I'm talking about these various subjects, then refer to that document. So without further ado, let's go. Currently there are 61 total unique subclasses in this game, and no two subclasses play the same despite some sharing the same name and skills. But this video isn't to try and sell you on one class or another, it's just to say that choosing class in this game is not an easy process. With this many potential characters, it may take making a few of them yourself before you find out what you actually want to commit to playing. But one aspect that encompasses all classes is that they each fall into one of three categories. You're either going to be a buffer, a synergy, or a DPS, or as I will call it, a deeps character. There is no ambiguity about this. Your character will fall into one of these three camps, and you can immediately tell which camp that they are in by the letter designation next to a character's name in the party menu. The buffer role is reserved for only three characters currently in the game: Male Crusader, Female Crusader, and the relatively new Enchantress character. Their role, as their name suggests, is to buff their party. In simple terms, this is done by providing an extremely potent buff for the entire party at all times, and access to an incredibly powerful buff that is provided temporarily by their first awakening active. Buffers also provide healing, speed buffs, and resurrection options for supporting as well, albeit in slightly different ways from one another. Because of this, a buffer is considered absolutely mandatory for most parties in the endgame, and will often dictate how easy the content will be by how strong their buffs are and how well they can keep their party alive. The synergy role is reserved for 24 of the total 61 characters in the game. Their role can very simply be boiled down to: this character provides a 34% damage buff to everyone in the party except themselves. As you can imagine, 34% damage buff to 3 other people in the party is a big deal, and thus at least one is very highly recommended in endgame parties, but not as mandatory as a buffer is. Synergy effects do not stack, however, and thus a party should only ever have at most 2 synergies in it in order to buff the entire party with a damage buff. If you have 3 or more synergies in a party, you don't know what you're doing. To compensate for this incredibly potent party buff, synergy characters generally do reduce damage when looking at their damage numbers compared to a pure DPS character, which leads me into my last role: pure deeps characters. Very simply put, these are everybody else in the game. Their role in the party is very simply to do damage. I've got nothing else really to say about them, and they compose the greatest majority share of characters in this game at 34. What I will say is that the difference in damage between a deeps and a synergy class isn't so much that it couldn't simply be made up and surpassed with more gear. Trust me, a more geared synergy can very easily do more damage in a pure deeps class that isn't as geared. So because of this, deeps characters generally want to invest more into their characters to ensure that their damage numbers are always on top and that they can fulfill their party role properly. Now that you kind of understand the 3 class roles, let's talk about the party compositions at the end game. It's pretty simple actually. You're always going to have one buffer. Like I said, you just gotta do it. Buffers cannot be negotiated. The content is balanced around buffers, and running without one will prove to be too challenging unless everyone is really overgeared for the content or you are really masochistic. Next, each party will have either 0, 1, or 2 synergies. Mathematically, given all other variables equal, 2 synergies in a party will concoct the strongest party possible in DFO. At least one synergy is highly recommended and is generally what most parties opt for due to their relative scarcity in DFO. Some parties may opt not to have a synergy at all in their party, but you'd be undoubtedly gimping yourself. If everyone else but the synergy is mega geared, it is preferable to take a no gear synergy than another geared deeps, simply because of how strong this synergy effect is. Lastly, all the other empty slots are for the DPS characters. They are pretty common due to simply how many characters make up this role. You're going to have at the very least one DPS character in the party because again, if there is ever a party with 3 synergies in them, something is terribly wrong and you should probably leave. Generally, the deeps is expected to do all the damage in the party, so if your buffer is geared and the boss is still taking forever to kill, it's probably the deeps' fault with either not playing so well or not being geared enough. Now I also want to mention that while I'm talking about out your roles in a party setting. This game can absolutely be played completely solo as well. Yes, grinding the content will take longer compared to joining parties and raids, but still easily possible given you are properly geared for it. I'd even argue that at least some buffers with the right gear can solo content if they really wanted to, but I would truly find them more useful to just party up and help everybody in the game. Now that you kind of understand how the classes work, let's talk about how the gear works. For that, there are really only two groups. You either gear as a buffer or you gear as a deeps character. If you're a synergy character, then it's simple. You're considered a deeps character for the sake of gearing. First, let's cover the buffer characters. Again, there are only 3, but because of that, their gearing situation is a bit unique in comparison to the rest of the cast. First, sometimes they have specially made sets designed exclusively for them. For instance, they have their own level 95 Harlem and Tabor sets that only enhance buffer skills. Nobody but buffers should wear them, and conversely, buffers should only be wearing these types of sets. There has been a strive to eliminate this distinction, however, and now most all gear after Fiend Wars and into 100 cap will simply have buffer options appended onto them that will only apply to them. Next, and this is kind of specific for the type of buffer, but their main focus is increasing their primary buff stat. For male Crusaders, that's your choice between Vitality or Spirit. And in the case of female Crusader and Enchantress, that is your intelligence. This can be done in so many different ways, from enchantments, emblems, titles, auras, creatures, amplification, and reinforcing your sub-equip, magic stone, and insignia. Lastly, their swap set is not an Operation Hope set like everyone else in the game. Instead, their swap set is generally their epic set and any other pieces of gear that increase their raw stats and potency of their primary buff skills, such as titles and creatures. The last thing I'll mention is that generally buffers will also attempt to overlevel their first awakening actives as much as possible with special auras, avatar tops, and titles. They will wear this gear on their person at all times, while their swap buff covers their primary damage buff. Yes, an effective buffer will need to do all of these things, which is precisely why they are considered some of the most costly characters in the game to truly gear out properly. It pays off in spades, however, because it's of my belief that a properly geared buffer can absolutely carry an under-geared team. Conversely, it would take an absurdly geared team to carry an under-geared buffer. Next, let's talk about the deeps and synergy gearing situation. First, because every character is a little bit different, you need to know your damage type, whether you are a physical or magical character, and your primary element if you have one. Again, the spreadsheet tells you that, or you can just look at your skill icons to figure that out. Now, generally, all other sets in the game that are not designed for buffers are DPS sets. They all increase your damage output, albeit just in different ways. Yes, there are guides out there that tell you which sets are the best for which classes, but to summarize, all of them simply increase your damage in one way or another. If you are a percentage damage class, you need to reinforce your weapon and earring. Doing so increases your physical and magic attack, which is your primary damage stat for these types of characters. Reinforcing your weapon will give you the biggest boost of your primary damage stat. However, there are also enchantments for your top, bottom, and sub-equipment that you'll want to acquire as well. Now listen up, if you are a fixed damage class, you have it a little different. Instead, your primary damage stat is independent attack, and the aforementioned physical and magic attack do not help your damage in any way. Because of this, you do not need to reinforce your weapon, and instead you will be refining your weapon at June the Blacksmith in Shonen. You will still need to reinforce your earring, however, because the earring also provides some amount of independent attack depending on the reinforcement level. After you've taken care of your primary damage source, the next thing that you should focus on is trying to get 100% crit rate. The spreadsheet will tell you how much in-town crit you will need to be able to achieve that. You can easily increase your crit rate by, again, some enchantments on your gear, as well as some emblems that you put onto your avatars. You'll next need to focus on one of the most important stats for any deep character, and that is your elemental damage. Which element you choose is only important for the characters that are element locked and must deal that type of element in their skills. For everyone else, just choose whatever element you want. Elemental damage can be increased primarily by enchantments on your weapons, accessories, and magic stones, but they can also be obtained in other ways. Basically, I said this just to say, if you're a deeps character and have something other than elemental damage enchanted in these slots, you're gonna get clowned on. Lastly, Deep's character swap sets are farmed in the Operation Hope and are simply a full 12-piece set of gear which should be complemented with any other gear that can increase your buff level to 10 levels above its mastery level. Now there are so many nuances and optimization of a person's gear, but this is just a general strategy of gearing that I want everyone to have an idea on. In short, buffers prioritize buffing their raw stat and increasing the potency of their primary buff and First Awakening. Deeps and Synergy characters focus on pumping up their primary damage stat, getting maximum crit, and then stacking as much elemental damage as they can. Lastly, I just want to end this beginner friendly video with a little glimpse of how the gameplay is at the end game of DFO. What does a typical day look like? Well, I do a daily series called Account Daily, so you can see what kind of content can be done every day if you have a lot of alts like I do. But maybe you only want to see what's usually done at the end game with actual party content. Well, that's where we talk about weekly content. Generally, we're talking about raids and things that have a certain number of runs per week. In other words, it's time-gated content where you'll have a few opportunities throughout the week to get them done. The aforementioned swap sets for Deep's characters can be farmed 3 times a week in the Operation Hope dungeon. There is also Tabor's farming, which is the gear required to start endgame raids, starting with Fiend Wards, which can be done 6 times a week, 3 times a day. Maybe you're looking for Terranium farming, then you can run Luke or Prey dailies, as well as Disaster Sector 3 in order to get ready to upgrade your raid level gear. Speaking of which, raids for the best gear occur on set days, and currently we have 3, but in a few weeks that's going to be going down to 2. All raids are available over the weekend, but then additionally you also have Prey and Luke available on Thursday and Fiend War available on Wednesday. You're only allowed to enter each raid a maximum of 2 times per character, and are rewarded raid-specific drops as well as undaunted determinations to purchase character-bound and account-wide items in the raid shop. Most at the end game are focusing on this content, but it's not all there is. If you're already done with Fiend War, then you're even strong enough to start farming the Pandemonium War and start getting your talismans and runes. But hey guys, that's just some of what's available in the game as of 95 cap. Once 100 cap drops in a few weeks, we'll undoubtedly have so much more to focus on as well. But anyway guys, thanks for watching. I really wanted to get this video done before 100 cap came along. Hope this was helpful, and I will catch you knights later.